Hey, it's Growing Up Punk, Episode 1. Well, we're back. It's been a while. How you doing, Aaron? How was your summer and your spring and your new year? Because it feels like it's been since last year that we recorded, even though that's not true. But it's been a while.
Yeah, it has been millennials, as it has felt like, however long that is. Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah. Well, before we get into today, we decided, so right before we stopped recording for a stretch of time, we kind of changed what the podcast sort of was about. Not really, but just sort of, I guess, refining it a little bit. Changed the name, obviously, to Growing Up Punk. And the idea was we were going to talk about, a lot of the stuff that we listened to as we were growing up. And then I thought, let's try, even though obviously our stories aren't identical as to when we discovered bands and in what order and that sort of thing, but to try to kind of put something together where we go through the order of kind of, punk bands as we discovered them, as we heard them. So this episode is going to be kind of like episode 1, sort of, in a sense, where we're going to start this how we're going to do this from here on out. We still will probably have some new music reviews in here. Like I know we've been discussing over text message with, our top albums of the year and stuff, that we'll do an episode of that for like New Year's and whatnot. But we're going to talk about MXPX today. But first, I had a story to share with you because it's been so long since we've chatted.
Yeah, share a story, Father Abraham.
So, I mean, I'm sure you recall the reason we kind of the podcast has been put off a little bit is because I was working on my basement and stuff. So evenings were just kind of busy, right? Well, one of those evenings this was an afternoon that I was working on my basement. I was getting, like, we're pretty much done now. I literally have one closet left to put shelves in, and then it's all done.
Nice.
But yeah, I was putting trim on one night, and I had to. I was putting trim beside this door, and I realized, I'm like, oh, the piece of trim is just wide enough, but the hinges are kind of getting in the way. So I'm like, I gotta clear out some space so that the trim will go around the hinges. But I don't have the appropriate tools to do that, because I don't know if you know this about me or not, but regardless of me developing my basement, I am not a handy person at all, like in the slightest, and this story will probably prove that. But so I was like, oh, I just need to clear a little bit of space, so I'm going to use a utility knife to kind of mark my spots, and then sort of like the closest thing I could think of was like whittling, but sort of like whittle some of the it was just like MDF trim. I was just gonna slowly slice it away, right? Sort of deal. And so I was doing the thing that they tell you since probably like kindergarten, if not before, that you're not supposed to do. I was cutting towards myself.
Oh no.
And I nearly cut part of my thumb off.
Wow.
So I was like kind of like cutting out the spot, and then all of a sudden, and I was literally had the thoughts right before, I'm like, I probably shouldn't be doing this. And then it slipped, and it was like one of those things where I was like, did I cut myself? Because when I looked at my thumb, it wasn't bleeding, but then all of a sudden it just started like gushing blood. I'm like, yep, I cut myself. And so I spent the next few weeks, I refused to go get stitches, even though, like, had the knife gone another, half a centimeter or so, I would have literally cut the half of my side of my thumb off.
Yikes.
But I was like, I'm not going for stitches, because if I go for stitches, then I'm just going to sit in, the emergency room waiting for hours.
Yeah.
And then, like, that's just going to waste my day to get work done. So I'm like, I'm just going to, get the bleeding stopped, and then I'll bandage it up, and then, I'll go back to work. And so that's exactly what I did. I sat down for a bit, got the bleeding stopped, put some bandages and some polysporin on it and whatever. And, it was hurting. It was throbbing a little bit. And after a bit, I went back to work, and it was all good. I was, putting trim on, getting some work done. And then later in the evening, my wife is home, and I'd like told her what happened. And she's like, you should probably go get stitches. And I was like, nah, I don't really want to sit around waiting for stitches. And so we I got all the trim done in the room, and so we were getting it set up. It was a bedroom for my daughter, so we were building this new bed for her. And I was like literally on the last step of building this new bed, and I had to it was an IKEA bed, so you know how like sometimes they'll give you like plastic plugs that fit in, you know, like the holes to kind of cover where the bolts are or whatever.
Yeah.
I was trying to put one of those in, and of course I'm fumbling because I've only got like one hand that's fully working because I'm trying to keep my thumb out of harm's way. And in doing so, I like slipped and like banged my thumb off of like the side of the bed. And I'm like, wow, that hurt. Like that hurt quite a bit. I'm like, whatever, shake it off, start working. And all of a sudden I look at the floor and there's like blood dripping. I'm like, oh, and I look at my hand and I just like reopen it. It's just like running down my hand. So I'm like, Lindsay, can you get me something? And so she like brings me like a small Band-Aid. I'm like, no, I mean like something
Duct
to
tape.
like, to contain the blood here. Right. Like it was pretty gnarly. And she's like, you should go get stitches. I'm like, I'm not going to get stitches. So anyway, I never went and got stitches. And now it's basically all healed up. I definitely cut through some nerve endings because like where it is now, it's just feels a little like numb most of the time. But it was, you know, it was a journey. I can now say I put blood and sweat into that basement.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, that's a bonus.
Wow.
And it's almost done now. So you know what? The fact that now I'm going to jinx myself. I'm going to be like putting shelves in and I'm going to lose a finger or something. But the fact that I didn't actually lose anything, I think is a big win.
Question is, how much MXPX did you listen to while redoing the basement?
That's a great question, Aaron. I'm so glad you asked. I listened to a little bit. Like
I listened to none.
I listened to none. It's actually funny because the album that I listened to probably the most when doing the basement, as far as MXPX is concerned, would be "Let It Happen."
Oh,
which is
so good.
A strange one. I mean, part of it's probably just because it's so long, right? Like it's what I think over an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah,
it's crazy long, but yeah, that's probably what I listen to the most, and as far as MXPX albums are concerned, and I loved it. You know, it's still as good as it was, even though it's one of those albums that's, I don't know what people think about it, because obviously that first release was done kind of, you know, without MXPX's permission per se. I don't know if you know the story behind that record, but yeah. So speaking of MXPX, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how, you know, you first heard MXPX, what the first song was, maybe who told you about them, because they're for me like a band where I've got a story. I can specifically remember the first song, where I heard it, and then how they changed my outlook on music from there. So let's go with you first. How did you first discover MXPX?
That's going way back in the vault here. You know, I don't even know if I can remember the specific moment, but some of the bigger ones were going to a bookstore like we usually did when we were in a city, and just looking for music, and mostly based just off of what the covers looked like. You know, sometimes listening to demos. And I remember seeing the cover of Teenage Politics, but my mom didn't like the cover of it, so she said I couldn't get it. Just so funny, because she's just pretty much just basing it off of that, you know, the Pocanaccia character on the front, which I don't know what about that offended her, but
cartoons are evil, man.
Well, I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons, so maybe she thought it was it was in the same vein or something.
Maybe. Funny thing, not to quickly interject about The Simpsons, I have a funny story where, same thing, I wasn't really allowed to watch The Simpsons for a stretch there. And I remember there was like one night where I was like, Mom, like, can we please, you just let me, she's like, okay, I'll watch an episode with you. And there happened to be a scene in that episode, I forget which, I want to say it was when like Homer was the mascot maybe for the Springfield Isotopes or something. But anyway, he goes into like the boss's office of the baseball team, and he's only wearing like his underwear. And that was like, that did it for my mom. She's like, no, you're not watching this.
Cartoon character in underwear, so inappropriate. Right.
Cartoon character in their underwear, that's a no-go. Anyway, so your mom didn't like the artwork for Teenage Politics.
And I guess I just kind of took that as, okay, whatever, I'll just find something else. And I can't remember what I got instead. So there was kind of little things like that. You know, maybe I would see something in a magazine, but, you know, I was, I don't know, maybe like 11, 12. Yeah. And so I didn't really have any, you know, context of it. I was like, oh, I just thought it was cool. And actually, sorry, I just remembered, I just remembered the first time I heard of it. So this was probably like grade like 6. I might have even been like 10 or something.
Right.
And
Right.
I had some friends come over for a sleepover, and they had MXPX on the cover. So I think that was their second release, I think, after Pokin' At Ya that came out. So that was that was before Teenage Politics, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. It was that was definitely all right around the same time.
Yeah.
I want to say On the Cover was after Teenage Politics, but
Okay. Like I'm pretty sure I was still in elementary school, maybe in grade 7. And so yeah, I mean the cover stood out. They just looked so cool on there. And I mean, I had no idea what cover songs were. I had never heard of any of those songs before.
You just assumed they were all theirs.
Well, yeah, I was like, covers EP, okay, like, sure, sounds good. And so I remember like dubbing it onto a tape for myself, even though my brother was like, I don't think mom and dad are gonna like you listening to this. I was like, whatever. These are good friends, and if their parents let them have it, then it should be good for me. And so I remember loving that, but kind of thinking like, okay, some of these songs, because there's a few songs in there that are, more kind of straight up punk or whatever, and then a few that are kind of, more goofy and gimmicky or whatever. And so I remember thinking like, okay, this is a little weird. I don't necessarily like love all the songs, but I just thought it was so cool because it was something new and different. And so anyways, so that's kind of, so there's a few things like that where I'd seen the name and heard of it, and then I saw, Teenage Politics at the store. And so I think eventually my brother or a friend got Life in General. So that was the one after Teenage Politics.
Yeah.
And I think by that point I was kind of listening to whatever. My parents had kind of stopped kind of really paying too much attention to what I was listening to. And that album just changed my life. Like, that was just the craziest thing I could ever imagine, and still is my all-time favorite album to this day. And so that's kind of, some of those earlier memories, and, and just kind of starting to see their name more often. I'd randomly open, a Thrasher magazine, and there'd be an ad for that album or an interview or something. And I just remember thinking like, man, like, this is so cool. Like, this band is like different places than I would have thought, still trying to, not having access, to the internet and a lot of things. So I was just kind of randomly like, oh, like, I didn't know MXPX was this or that or whatever. And then it just kind of, snowballed from there with various things. And when we did get dial-up or, internet at school and high school, I'd go and I'd print off every picture they had posted and put them all over my walls in my room. And
I totally had a bulletin board that was covered in pictures of MXPX, along with like my ticket stub from when I first saw them live.
Yeah.
Like I think about that now and I go, man, like, that was such like straight up, like, when you think about, especially in the 90s, like that stereotypical like teenage girl, right, where they got the pictures of all their favorite, actor boys and boy bands all over the wall. I'm like, we essentially did the same thing, except I like printed them off because they weren't in all, every magazine and whatnot. And I still like put them up on a bulletin. I had my MXPX shrine. I wanted to say though, as far as like when the albums were released, so Pokin' At Ya was October 4th, 1994. Teenage Politics, this is crazy, was July 4th, 1995. So like that's only like not even a year later. And then On the Cover was released on November 28th, 1995. Before and then finally Life in General, November 19th, 1996. So within just over 2 years, they released 4 different albums.
Yeah, wow.
Like, that is insane when you think about it. But I don't have like that specific like moment where I can think of, putting it on and hearing the song for the first time or hearing that band for the first time. But for sure the song was Teenage Politics, and it was on a sampler that my sister had.
Like Seltzer or something?
Yeah. It was on Seltzer, which is kind of interesting because Seltzer was put out by Forefront Records, if I remember correctly. And, of course, MXPX was on Tooth and Nail. So what they were doing on there, I don't know. But they were on there alongside, like, I think, like Audio Adrenaline was on there.
I think it was just like a Christian bookstore, like, get to know some new bands or something.
Right. Now I'm curious to see what was all on there, because that was the one song that for sure, like, stuck out for me.
Oh, for
Bleach
sure,
may
yeah.
have been on there though, which is a win. Okay, so I think I have the track list. Okay, so this is the track listing for Seltzer. Newsboys, Jars of Clay, Poor Old Lou. So there. Okay, we do have Seven Tooth and Nail. Poor Old Lou, Plank Eye. That's right. Audio Adrenaline, Third Day, DC Talk, PFR, Johnny Q Public, MXPX, Grandma Train. That was another good one.
Yeah.
Holy Soldier. Don't remember them. OC Supertones, The Choir, and Big Tent Revival. So, who released it? Yeah, it was on Forefront, but it looks like it's like Forefront / Tooth and Nail, which is funny. But yeah, so it was that sampler, and I don't remember, how, like, my sister probably saw it at a Christian bookstore and bought it, or if it came with something, I don't know. But I remember hearing that song and being like, oh, what is this? And so naturally I went out and I bought Teenage Politics. And from there, it was just like a thing where I'm like, I needed to buy. My goal then was every available MXPX album. So at that point, by the time I got Teenage Politics, Life in General was out, but it was definitely before Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo. But yeah, so it was like this whole thing where I'm like, and from there, it was all about taking in, every word that I could, knowing all the song titles, reading all the liner notes to find out the bands they thanked. I was thinking about this before recording. I was like, MXPX, I could probably trace every band for me, not every band, but definitely every punk, pop punk, that kind of band.
Yeah.
Back to MXPX, because I would just like pour through their liner notes. And I would just be like, who are they thanking? What are these bands that they're thanking? And then you just have to. And nowadays, if that was still a thing, I don't know that bands really thank other bands in their liner notes these days, because I don't know the last time I bought a physical CD necessarily. But now it would be so easy to go find that music, right? Yeah. Whereas back then, you'd be like going through and like, oh, who's. And I remember, I'm pretty sure on Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo, they thanked A Newfound Glory. And which is the original name for Newfound Glory before they dropped the
right.
But like to like discover what that was, you'd either have to have a friend who had it, or this was in the infancy of like Napster. So like I can remember like people at my school would would be like, oh, you want a CD? You want anything you want on CD? You give me $5 and I can make it for you.
Oh man, I had to pay 10.
Yeah, it was like some were probably 10, but. Or you'd have to go out and buy it yourself, right? So, but most of the bands that I went and discovered after, reading their name in the MXPX liners, I ended up enjoying, right? Like there was never really, I can't think of one where I was like, well, that was a downer. But it's crazy for me when I think of a band that laid it all out for me into like that determined what I would listen to throughout the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, not even just like band-wise, but even like clothing-wise. I mean, I got my lip pierced because Mike had a lip piercing. I wanted to get tattoos because he was tattooed. Like, I based like my whole identity on that band pretty much, and in some ways still do. Like.
Yeah.
So
that's fair. Like, I mean, I was for sure buying Dickies pants and looking for random like black thrift store T-shirts.
Oh man, that was a dream.
Yeah, because of like the pictures in the Ever Passing Moment, or like stuff like that, or cutting my hair because Tom cut his hair this way. In the Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo pictures. And it did, like totally like they were one of those bands. It's funny when you mention, and I think I probably mentioned this in our long lost Slick Shoes episode, which is that what I No, I didn't re-upload that one. I'm gonna have to though. I do have that, the Slick Shoes episode, before the great server,
the great decline.
Yeah, there you go. Before the downfall of our Western server. I don't know. Anyway, trying to make that an MXPX reference, but. Yeah, no, Slick Shoes, you talk about like getting piercings, like on the Wake Up Screaming pictures for Slick Shoes, I noticed, I think it's like Ryan, the singer, had like his ears pierced like 4 times. He had 2 like hoops in each ear. Yeah. And I was like, I got to do that. So I immediately went out and like got 4 piercings at once. Bang, 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 bang. But I never made it to the hoops because anytime I tried to put those like that style in that he was wearing, I'm like, oh, it hurts.
Yeah.
So I just had studs for years. But now I just got nothing. I took them out and they're no longer there. But yeah, no, totally like that. But I mean, that's probably still a thing for music. but for sure, like they were definitely one of those bands like in the pop punk, in the punk rock scene where I looked at and was like, I need to wear Chuck Taylor shoes, Converse Chucks and stuff. Like it was down to a T. But them and Blink for sure. But I found that Blink almost always wore shorts and MXPX almost always wore pants. That's the difference. I don't
know if I ever picked up on that.
That's the difference being from Southern California versus being from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You wear Dickies pants when you're from the Pacific Northwest, and you wear Dickies shorts when you're from Southern California.
Yeah, there you go.
So, as far as like music was concerned, so did you like when? I know you've seen them live, but when was that first time that you got to see them live? Because for me, they were one of the first bands for sure, like a real show, legit show that I went to.
Yeah, that might have even been my first. I had been to a few others at like youth conferences, like still cool punk bands, but MXPX was the first time, I was in just a regular venue. I was in Winnipeg. That would have been in maybe 97. Was that right after Buffalo came out, or maybe right before?
Yeah, because Buffalo, I think, came out in 98, I want to say.
Okay. Yeah, like that was with No Motive and Too Bad Eugene. I guess I could...
Yeah, okay, so it was the same tour then that I saw them on. And I want to say that was 98 or 99.
Oh, okay. Okay, maybe it was later on.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was also... You know what it was also after? Because Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo came out in 98, but that tour was after the release of At the Show, which was 99.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because I remember being so pumped for the bit where, he goes like, At the Show, right? And the whole crowd sings it. And because, that was on At the Show.
Yeah.
And, so I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was after that.
Okay, yeah.
I want to say... Yeah, I want to say I saw them in November of 99, something along those lines.
Yeah, I remember it being cold, so... But yeah, I mean, that was I would have been, 13, I guess, and I went with my brother and one of his friends. And I remember just being, like, so stoked that my parents allowed me to go, and it was amazing. Like, I met Mike after and got my CD signed and got a picture with him.
Nice.
And it was kind of my first, like... almost celebrity, right? Because, by that point it had been a few years and seeing them in magazines and stuff, and it just felt so crazy to actually be seeing them. And, I mean, they were just as awesome and cool and in person as I had expected. And, yeah, it was such a great experience.
Yeah. So I'm just reading some random blog post. I was trying to figure out when it was. And this guy says, No Motive opened for MXPX in Eugene, Oregon in 2000. So
it was sometime in the 90s still.
Yeah, I was to say, it's possible that, like I said, I think it may have been November of 99, but maybe it was a little bit later. I don't know. But that was definitely the first time I saw them as well, was on that tour. And that tour, actually, it's interesting because, like, No Motive, that's a band that's an opener that convinced me, I'm like, don't miss openers. Because, like, I mean, Too Bad Eugene, I didn't really take a whole lot away. I was familiar with them, obviously, in their music and connection with the scene anyway, but, like, No Motive I'd never heard.
Right.
And I went and saw them, and I think the only thing I bought from that show, merch-wise, was a No Motive and the Sadness Prevails CD, which is turning 25 this year, I might say, so that's pretty awesome. We're getting old.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, but that is it turning 20, or maybe it's turning 20? 20 would make more sense.
Yeah.
1999.
Right,
it wasn't released in 1994. 20. It's turning 20 years old this year. Yeah, no, that was for sure the first time that I saw them, and MXPX, that is, and absolutely, like, I could just remember being so stoked. Front of the show, I was standing over on, like, looking, I was on the left hand side, so, like, right in front of, like, Tom, because being a guitar player, I was like, this is where I need to be, and. Yeah, and my ears coming out of that show, that being the first time I kind of experienced that, I should have worn earplugs sort of vibe.
No, I can't remember those specific things like that. I do remember feeling too intimidated to kind of push my way closer. I had a camera, which would have been, like a disposable camera back, or maybe like a film camera or something. And I mean, all my pictures are just kind of like heads, and you can kind of see the guys in the background. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was definitely too intimidated to
Yeah.
kind of make my way a bit closer.
Yeah, I made my way up close enough to where there was a part where like Tom was playing and he kind of like stood on like foot on the stage, foot on the barricade. I'm trying to think if there even was a barricade, but I was like able to reach up and like touch his guitar like that. So I was right up there, and it wasn't like in the pit because I was off to the side, but you kind of get caught in like the waves of motion that kind of happen when you're up towards the front as someone gets pushed, and it like creates a ripple effect. But yeah, and then they're a band that like I just kind of followed and have seen a number of times. I don't know if they're a band that I've seen the most, but they're definitely the band that I've traveled the farthest to see. Because like a number of years ago, drove down from Edmonton to Seattle to go see them when Five Iron Frenzy was opening up for them.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like that trip was like, oh, when am I going to get to see Five Iron Frenzy again? And so it was like, let's go see Five Iron Frenzy and MXPX. And I mean, MXPX still stole the show. They were the only band that I ended up going into the pit and towards the front for, right? Because they are the band for me.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know about you, but I still will purchase their music to support them, even if as their albums went on through the years, they aren't necessarily my favorite albums. Like when I look at MXPX, I really look. I mean, specifically, if you want to talk about all-around albums, like Life in General, Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo, and then The Ever-Passing Moment, like that trio of albums are all incredible. I'll still go back and listen to Teenage Politics, and obviously this summer and whatnot, I was listening to Let It Happen at times. And then kind of from there, I sort of lose them for a little bit, like with, was it Before Everything and After and Panic and stuff like that? Like, I've still bought them to support them, but didn't really listen to them too much. And then I felt like with Plans Within Plans, they kind of came back a little bit for me, and I jumped back on board again.
Yeah, I think I definitely still kept up with all their albums. I still remember going to the store and buying, I'm pretty sure every one of their CDs, when it came out, even up until Plans Within Plans, and then the latest one, I backed it, so I got a download of it, and I didn't get a physical copy of that one. But yeah, even when I kind of got more out of punk into heavier things, they were still a band that always got me excited. I always liked their albums. Like, maybe later on now, if I go back and, because it's just more information, I've listened to more podcasts, people talking about things. And so then when I've gotten back and listened, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe certain albums or songs maybe weren't what I thought or remembered. But overall, there's not really any album of theirs I couldn't just put on and fully enjoy and know all the lyrics to. There's not really any, I definitely have friends that, just would say, oh, I hated that album by them, or, maybe they changed their sound on one and they just disliked it. And that kind of stuff just never bothered me. I kind of just grew with them and enjoyed everything they put out.
I think, like, as far as those couple of albums where, like, I mean, where I kind of lost touch a little bit, there were still songs on there that were good. There was just, like, I feel like for a band, because they kind of slowed down a little bit, which I'm not necessarily against, like, for those few albums. But I just felt like as far as, like, the production and was concerned, like, it just felt like it was missing things to me. And I don't know if it was like specifically, like sometimes I listen to it, I go, oh, I wish Yuri did a little more on the drums on those songs,
right.
Like kind of slowed down a bit. Or, like Tom wrote, had a few extra guitar parts. But the reality about MXPX is they've never been that, right? Like they've always been like that straight ahead punk band. When you look at like, obviously like a big band that they would have definitely toured with, played shows with, whatnot, like being Blink. Like Blink was riff heavy, right? Like Tom DeLonge wrote like really great riffs, and they would build songs around that. MXPX never really did that. There would be the odd song where they might have a riff, but for the most part, it was all about, just getting in there and getting business done, and, and having that raw energy that they did have. And so when they kind of like cleaned the production up and slowed down a little bit, that's where I was like, it didn't translate as well for me. But with Plans Within Plans, I felt like they kind of were bringing back a bit of that edge, getting a little faster and whatnot. And then even, like their latest album, I backed it. And, I got a vinyl copy and whatnot, and I enjoy it. I like that there are definitely there's like kind of some fan service done on some songs and just some head nods here and there, and you can kind of hear songs where I'm like, oh, this sounds like it could be on Teenage Politics. Oh, this sounds like it could be on, The Ever Passing Moment, and you can kind of hear these bits here and there. And I do enjoy it. I still think I like Plans Within Plans better, but I love what MXPX has done in recent years as far as going, look, we've got our fan base that we know, and that fan base is dedicated to us, so let's cater to that fan base.
Right. Yeah, I feel like on all their albums, even the ones that, maybe progressed a bit differently sound-wise, they still always had the, kind of classic sounding songs. They never just kind of, pulled like a Green Day and just released, like when Warning came out by Green Day, or even, some of the later stuff that is like, okay, this just doesn't even really sound like them anymore. I'm so glad they never went that route. Maybe they wanted to or thought about it, but I love that they're a band that's been going for 25 plus years that still sounds like the band that everyone has known to come and love. And so I hope they just kind of keep that up. He did, Tumble Down or whatever, side projects to do that kind of stuff. And so I always kind of appreciated that about them, that they kind of stuck to their sound, evolve here and there and try different things, but, kind of stick to what made them famous.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Green Day, because I think on Plans Within Plans, I think that Punk Rock Celebrity kind of reminds me of a song that could fit on, like, as far as the sound is concerned, on like American Idiot or something, because it's kind of this bigger, longer song. I don't even know how long it is, but it kind of has different parts where it changes. But I'd agree with you in saying like they've definitely like maintained that sound. And now like they don't necessarily do full tours. They might do like small things, or most of it's like weekend sort of stuff. And just like knowing that, like that's great. Like the last time I saw them was just a couple summers ago, and I think you were at one of the shows or both of the shows.
Oh yeah, I was at both. Yep.
Yeah, in Calgary. I just went to one, but it was like totally this thing where I was like, this is awesome. Like I never expected that to be on their list of dates that they would do, right? Yeah. Like I assumed when I went and saw them in Seattle, like that's kind of going to be the closest they get. But they came up to Calgary, and I was like, man, it's so good. And the fact that like that's how they do things now, right? They're like, okay, we know we can go and we can play these clubs, we can sell them out, and we'll do, a weekend here, weekend there, maybe a couple extra dates. Because I think, did they not? I want to say they went over to Australia or something recently.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I can't quite remember what it was, but.
And just and like the way they just catering kind of to their fans in that regard. Not like I feel like they're at a point in their careers where they're like, we don't need to go and make new fans and sell all these records and tour the world to try to like do that, to accomplish that. They're like, yep, we got some songs, let's put out a record, and we'll see if we got if our fans will back us in that. And it's just, I just think it's great, like because they'll always have that audience, like even if you're not a big fan of the last couple records, guaranteed if you're a fan of MXPX, you were singing along every word to a couple of their records earlier on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, let's talk about your favorite record, your favorite MXPX record, and then favorite MXPX song, if you can narrow it down.
Yeah, well, it's definitely Life in General. That's the one I can put on pretty much any time, no matter what, and it just brings joy to me. It's got the most nostalgia to it. Just as soon as it starts, the sound of the album and the songs, and just everything about that album is just a perfect album for me. Even like the cover art by, for sure one of my all-time favorite covered arts, and that was the thing too. And art back then, like that was, now it's still a thing, but it's not as focused on. Much of a thing. And so I just remember seeing that and thinking like, man, like this is so cool. Like if my friends saw this, they would want to know who this band is. And so definitely that album. As for favorite song, I don't know if I could pinpoint that. And a band like MXPX, like so many of their songs are, or I guess with any kind of punk band, so many songs are similar, right? It's all fast, catchy, chunky guitars. So there's not necessarily one that stands out from others. There'd be too many too many to name on that.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Life in General would be that album for me.
Yeah, I think like for me, favorite album is Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo. I just loved how it seemed like they grew up some,
Yeah.
you know, like from the album before to that. And I know they went through some stuff contractually and whatnot. Now, as far as like favorite song, it is a little trickier because I think for the most part, my favorite song is probably Doing Time. If not that, then Set the Record Straight off
good.
of Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo. I always just loved how it started with like the unplugged electric guitar,
love
right?
that.
I was like, that's pretty sweet. And then Inches from Life is also pretty great off of Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo as well. But that is definitely, part of it could be because like Buffalo was the first album that I was around for, like as far as an MXPX fan is concerned, that I got to like buy when it came out, right? Like I got to look forward to that. And then so like you bought it and I just like listened to it nonstop, and it immediately put everything else on the back burner. Life in General is definitely, I would say, number 2 for me because they are pretty similar as far as like the pace of the record and the sound of the record. Buffalo's a little rawer in sound to Life in General, but they're both definitely like staples of that time, like that early sort of pop punk thing, you know, like Blink-182, Dude Ranch sort of era before like the explosion of pop punk, right? Which I mean they were a part of as well, obviously, like with the song Responsibility and whatnot. Like they definitely got some radio play out of that on The Ever Passing Moment. But just like where everything was still like so pure and so raw, and you know, like Buffalo came out shortly before, or I guess a little bit before, Enema of the State, because Enema of the State was 99, I think. So I mean, like that's kind of when I see like things really sort of took off for the pop punk world. But yeah, Buffalo is the one that I can definitely go back to and sing along to every song, word for word.
What's cool about that album is, you know, with just being a music fan and trying to figure things out, you know, I just always assumed if I heard a band's album that the next one would just sound exactly the same. And so I remember specifically with Buffalo, starting with the cover art, kind of thinking like, okay, this looks quite a bit different than Life in General. And it didn't, you know, get me as excited. And so, but then I remember hearing it and just thinking like, okay, this is still MXPX. I love it. But it was a bit different. It wasn't just straight fast songs, the whole album, like Life in General was. And so I remember just kind of that album helping me grow in understanding, you know, what it means to be a musician and an artist, and just kind of evolving a bit and changing. Still the same band, but having a bit more dynamic on an album. And so I remember thinking that was really cool, and just it was cool to have albums to kind of, you know, help me through that. I didn't really have an older person to kind of be like, hey, this is how music works or whatever, right? And so I have good memories of listening to that and just kind of having those thoughts going around in my head and just kind of helping me grow to understand what a band was.
Yeah, like MXPX was a band for sure that kind of changed from one album to the next, right? Like you could kind of differentiate if you put an album on that you go, oh, well, that came from a different album than this song and whatnot, right? Like part of that was definitely production. Like it wasn't like they were super progressive in their sound, but I did always appreciate that about MXPX. Is like, oh yeah, you could put a song on and immediately I might not be familiar with the song necessarily right off the top, but like, oh, that's off of The Ever Passing Moment, or oh, that's off of this album or this album, right? So yeah, that's they definitely held that. But yeah, no, for me, MXPX will always be the band. I credit them all the time for me being into music as much as I am, because they were that first band where I was like, oh, I got to figure out what all these lyrics are, who they're thanking, you know, who all these other bands are and whatnot. So, you know, whether or not they continue releasing music that I love as much as the early stuff, I will still always continue to support them, because I feel like, yeah, it's the least I can do for them getting me into music to the, you know, the way that I am.
Yeah, they were also the first band that I ever got band merch from. You know, there was the first time I ever ordered merch online, and it seemed like 6 months to get my stuff in the mail. And, you know, I was on their fan club getting newsletters, and, you know, in high school I had so many of their shirts. I probably wore a different MXPX shirt every day. There was
Right.
there's a few different people that would kind of poke fun at me and just be like, what's MXPX, or
Yeah.
they had no context of what a band shirt even was. But
Right.
I just remember being so proud to to wear them for my school pictures, and I just loved kind of having them with me all the time.
They were definitely up there as far as that's concerned for me as well, like first band merch. Although I can only think of, I think, one MXPX shirt that I owned, and I actually bought it from HMV of all places.
Nice.
Yeah, it was for sale in HMV, and it was way too big for me. But I still wore it. That, and I bought a Blink shirt from HMV as well that I definitely wore in a school picture. I can picture it right now off the top of my head. But anyway, that is going to do it for this episode of Growing Up Punk. Hopefully we're back to more regular episodes because, like I said, life is hopefully, evening out a little bit, not quite so busy. But you can follow us on Instagram. I'm on Instagram and Twitter with @DavidGrowingUp. And then Aaron, I know you're on Instagram at @AaronGrewUpPunk. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. I see it's been so long I forget. But anyway, wherever you're listening to this, you can you can find it everywhere, basically. You can find us now on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, on Spotify. That's new from back in the day. YouTube, all that kind of stuff. Wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, help us spread the word about Growing Up Punk. But that'll do it. So goodbye.
See ya.